and that is for the company Pinterest. And that's company's been around for about 10 years now, and it's finally going public. And back in the days of the dot coms, a company like Pinterest probably would have gone public a year or two after it was formed. But now they're letting these companies mature quite a bit longer before bringing them public. But one thing that hasn't changed from the dot com days is that Pinterest still isn't making any money. And you might want to ask yourself, the company's been around for 10 years, right? If they haven't figured out how to make a profit yet, are they ever going to do it? Because at least in the frenzy of the dot com mania, people were saying, look, the company hasn't made a profit yet because it's only been around for a year. But don't worry, it's got all this explosive growth. We're grabbing eyeballs, whatever it was. But people were willing to bet that the companies would eventually be profitable. And they didn't have a lot of data to go on because the companies hadn't even been in existence for very long before they were going public. It was a rush, to the market. But now that you've got these companies that have been, going on for 10 years, I mean, they've had 10 years at Pinterest to try to figure out how to make a profit. And they haven't done it. I mean, they're not losing as much as Lyft or like Uber, but I think I heard 6 years at $80 million is what they lost last year. So why does the company have any value at all if it's losing this much money? I mentioned this before, but because the Fed has kept interest rates so low for so long and the cost of capital is so low, a lot of companies are able to attract funding and stay in business that under a normal free market system, capitalist system, they would have gone bankrupt. And I'm going to be getting to that momentarily because I'm going to spend the majority of the time on this podcast talking about capitalism and whether or not it needs to be reformed and addressing the points that Ray Dalio made on 60 Minutes and on CNBC and in various other media outlets and in the press. But before I get to that, I just want to stay on this topic a little bit of Pinterest because Pinterest has a lot of employees, right? It consumes a lot of other resources that go into operating this website, right? There's land, there's labor, there's capital. A lot of resources are being consumed, right? Resources that could otherwise be, put to some other use, but they're being used by Pinterest. And the way in a capitalist system if the resources are being used efficiently is how profitable the company is. Because if the company can combine resources to produce a product and then sell the product for a higher price than the resources that it consumed in producing it, it is adding value to the economy. The consumer gets more enjoyment out of that product than the resources consumed in producing it. You see, resources are scarce, right? But demand is unlimited. And the idea behind an economy is how to satisfy unlimited demand with limited resources. And resources that are utilized for one purpose are not available for another purpose. And if a company, though, is losing money, then the market is basically saying, hey, you're destroying value. You're creating products, but your customers don't even value those products as much as the resources were worth that you used to make them. So you're combining these resources in a way that doesn't enhance value, you're destroying value. And so when companies are losing money, they usually go out of business. That's the free market's way of stopping the bleeding, right? Hey, stop destroying resources. You're being punished with losses. If you are creating value, if you're adding value, you are rewarded with profit. So it's the profit motive that ensures that resources are used productively in a capitalist system. See, when you have the government using resources, it's taxpayer money. They couldn't care less how much money they lose, right? In fact, if you are a government agency, your goal is just to spend more money. The more money you spend, the bigger your budget is the following year, the more people you can employ. So governments never want to be resourceful with their resources. They want to, just spend as much as possible. But the private sector is always trying to be resourceful, trying to minimize inputs to maximize profits, and that's how you assure that you are creating value with the resources that you use. But Pinterest has been, providing these services for 10 years now, and we still have no idea whether or not the users actually value these services that Pinterest provides, uh, value them as much as the resources that are consumed in providing the service, right? Because I don't think Pinterest charges you to use the platform. It's free, but obviously it's not free to put it out there. Then they generate revenue from advertisers, but they don't generate enough revenue to cover the cost of operating the business. Now, maybe they will, but over 10 years, they haven't done it. And I think that if during these 10 years we had normal interest rates, right, if the Fed was not keeping interest rates artificially low, Pinterest would either already be profitable right now or they would be out of business. They would have figured out a way to be profitable, maybe at a lower scale. Who knows? Maybe there is a scale at which the company could be profitable. But what would that company be worth? I don't know. But the Fed has been able to keep this company and a lot of other companies in business. And all of this gambling mentality where people are willing to buy money losing companies is only there because of the casino like mentality that has been created by the Federal Reserve and the perpetual supply of cheap money that has enabled this and financed this. But again, all the resources that have gone into these companies that aren't producing profits and maybe are destroying value, those resources would have otherwise been invested more productively in ways that might have created more value, might have created better paying jobs for blue collar working class Americans, but instead they were there, involved in these ventures that are being supported by the Fed. But a dangerous sign, if you look at the valuation where Pinterest is being priced, the company is being valued at around, I don't know, 11 and a half billion. I think they're looking at a price between 15 and $17 a share, which is the low end of the range that had been expected. And in fact, if you look at the last round of financing that happened back in 2017 as a private round, right? The valuation was 12.3 billion at that time. So 2 years later, the company is actually going public as a down round. And what a down round means is where you have a round of financing where the valuation is lower than the previous round. And that's not normally what happens with an IPO. I mean, it's possible that you can have a down round while the company is still pre-IPO and raising money, although that could be a bad sign if that happens. But generally, investors do not think that the IPO is going to be the down round. That's supposed to be the big payday where everybody can unload their shares to the investing public. So the fact that they have to price this stock at a lower value than where the last private investors got in is a bad sign. First of all, the private investors who bought in thought they were getting a great deal, right? Hey, I'm getting in pre-IPO. They're actually paying more than the retail public who waited for the IPO. Although it's possible, if this was a hot issue, that even though they price it at 15 or 17, the first trade could be 18, 20, 21. So it's possible that by the time the retail investor gets a chance to buy it in the open market, it could be at a valuation that was higher than the last private round. But who knows? I mean, looking at how weak Lyft has performed, it's possible that there's no pop in this stock and it goes straight down. And if that is the case, that again validates my idea that we have run its course on this bear market rally, and Wall Street's appetite rather for speculation is waning, right? They're trying to take risk off. They're not as willing to buy these stocks on the come. And this whole thing, of course, is about speculation and gambling. And of course, that is the problem. And the fact that so many of our resources have been diverted by the Federal Reserve to unprofitable ventures, and so many of our resources are going to finance consumption rather than investment and increasing productivity, because the Fed has been steering resources to the government, and the government has been subsidizing and guaranteeing mortgage debt and student loans, right? A lot of activity has been funded at the expense of other activities that have not been funded, that have not contributed to economic growth. And that is the problem. This is what I want to get to. Ray Dalio has been making the rounds. He was on 60 Minutes. And of course, 60 Minutes, just what was it, a week or two ago, had Jay Powell on there talking about how great the economy is. But now they have Ray Dalio talking about how capitalism isn't working and how capitalism needs to be reformed. And of course, when you have a rich guy like Dalio, one of the most successful hedge fund guys out there, I forget his net worth, 15 to 20 billion dollars, a pretty big number, right? And so he's now telling CBS, right, bleeding heart liberals, hey, I want to come on your show and basically trash capitalism. I want to basically say that, capitalism isn't working. And of course, CNBC eats this stuff up, and that this is perfect for them. This is exactly what they like, a rich guy that's saying that capitalism's no good. So I'm watching this segment, and of course, they make a big deal about really showing how rich he is because they start off, they're in his private helicopter, and they land on his private yacht, and they take a ride in his private submarine, right? And of course, what CBS is trying to show is here's this billionaire with his own submarine, right? I mean, this is crazy, right? Look how much money this guy has. This isn't fair, right? He's so rich, and they're trying to really get people to be envious and think that this is obnoxious, consumption. But of course, if you look at how much money Dalio probably spends on his submarine and his yacht and his helicopter relative to his total net worth, relative to what he earns, he's actually probably consuming a small fraction of what he earns. I mean, the average American who has a job, spends everything, right? When they buy a car, they're spending a much higher percentage of their net worth than when a Dalio buys a yacht or a submarine. So he's got a lot of wealth that is out there, in society being invested productively. But they want to focus on the conspicuous consumption to try to show, look at all this wealth, right? This guy's got this submarine. So mostly they're focusing on all the stuff that he's got, right? Just to stir up those emotions. And then, of course, he starts talking about why capitalism isn't working and it needs to be reformed. And what is his evidence that capitalism isn't working? Well, it's because of this huge disparity between the rich and the poor. And he talks about how the rich have been getting richer and how the poor are getting poorer and the middle class is getting poorer. And therefore, he concludes that capitalism isn't working and it needs to be reformed. And pretty much the only thing that he said, at least the only thing that he said that 60 Minutes chose to air, was he said that he thought rich people should pay higher taxes, that the solution to the problem, the way to get capitalism to work, right, the way to reform it is just to take more money away from the capitalists and give it to the government. Like, we just need higher taxes. And this whole thing is a bunch of nonsense. Capitalism doesn't need to be reformed, right? I mean, Dalio is wrong. The problem is capitalism has basically already been reformed. What we need to do is restore it. The reason capitalism was reformed was because a bunch of politicians wanted to get elected. And so they promised people who didn't understand capitalism something for nothing, right? It's not that capitalism isn't working, it's democracy. That is the American institution that is failing, democracy. And of course, the fact that democracy is failing shouldn't surprise anybody, right? Of course, democracy is going to fail. That is the problem with democracy. It is destined to fail. That is why the founding fathers created America to be a republic, because they had studied the failed democracies going back to ancient Greece, and they knew that they did not work. And so they created America as a republic. And again, read the Constitution. It guarantees to every state of the Union a republican form of government. Just cite the Pledge of Allegiance, not that that's a legal document, but I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. The word democracy does not exist in the Constitution. It's not in the Bill of Rights. It's not in the Declaration of Independence, right? We were not established to be a democracy. We were established to be a republic. And there's a big difference. And, it's a famous anecdote. Benjamin Franklin walked out of the Constitutional Convention, and some people asked Dr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us? And his response was, a republic if you can keep it. And what he meant by that is if you can keep it from degenerating into democracy. Because once that happens, then it's all over, because the public is going to vote themselves broke. And that's exactly what's happened. But what's happened to capitalism is the government has ruined it by interfering with it. So we don't really have a capitalist system in America. I mean, we have capitalism to the extent that a lot of the capital is privately owned and a lot of the decisions on resource allocation and production are made based on the market. But we don't have a pure capitalistic system. We have a mixture, right? The government has mixed in a lot of elements of socialism into the economy. So what we have is a blended economy. We have a mixed economy of capitalism and socialism. But then to conclude that capitalism is the one that's failed, that's not true because it's the socialism that's failed. It's when you mix in socialism into capitalism, that's when you get the failure. So it's a failure of democracy because the reason that we screwed up capitalism with all these government regulations and taxes and subsidies and bailouts and central banks, it was all to appease voters. It was all because politicians wanted to get reelected, and so just getting reelected on a capitalist platform is, hey, let the market work it out, right? That's not how people get elected. People get elected by promising something for nothing. And there is no free lunch in capitalism. There is no something for nothing. You are rewarded based on how productive you are. That's why capitalism is the only fair economic system out there because nobody decides who gets what. It's all a meritocracy. It's all based on how productive you are. The more productive you are, the more value you can add to society, to other people, right? The more wealth that you can accumulate. The higher the salary you can command if you're working for wages, the more productive you are, the more wages you can earn, right? Because it's a market-based economy. There is competition. If you own a business, the better you do at satisfying the needs of your customers, right? The more money you make, right? If you do a better job than your competitor, that if you give your customers better, higher quality at a lower price, you are going to succeed.